Life Over Coffee. Conversations for Transformation.
Hello, everyone. This is Rick Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me for another Life Over Coffee episode. I have a special guest with me. His name is Elias Ghazal, and he's very proficient in all things Middle East, and we'll be talking about that over the next few moments. And I know that will be of interest to you. Things have dramatically changed over the last year since October the 7th, when they had the tragedy in Israel. And of course, it's been in the headlines ever since. And there's a lot of confusion about what's going on with Israel, Palestine, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, etc. There's always been trouble in the Middle East since the book of Genesis, as you very well know, but it certainly is heightened over this past year. We're doing this interview on May 1st, 2024, and I want to give you that timestamp because things seem to change every day, every week. It's just a different shade of a different kind of chaos. And as we're doing this interview now, there are riots and protests breaking out in universities all over America, from New York to Florida to Texas to California, where there's protest between pro-Palestine individuals protesting against the Israelis. And so it is a hot topic today. And I wanted to talk to someone who, one, is a Christian from the Middle East, who is well versed in these matters. And I had the privilege of interviewing Elias's wife several years ago now. It's been a minute or two, and I thought, hey, these are the perfect people that I could talk to. And so we reached out to Elias and said, hey, I'm not sure what my questions are, but I just want to move through this. I want to navigate through this. And I asked Elias before we went on here, you'll have to lead this because you're the one that's proficient in these matters. And so we're going to navigate through this, and I trust it will be beneficial for you. Also, for those of you who are part of our Leaders Over Coffee community, Elias has graciously said that he would come on to one of our monthly meetings. I'll get information about that later. But this will give our Leaders Over Coffee an opportunity to ask questions as well. And so, Elias, they will watch this interview or listen to the podcast. And so they'll be up to speed, and then they'll have a list of questions where we can further talk about this very important topic, not just for the Christian community, but for our world. Israel is the seed, it's the center of all things. And of course, it seems to be in the newspapers almost every day. And it's sad in many ways, but it's also confusing. And so I hope that you will be able to clear everything up for us over the next few minutes. So thank you, Elias Ghazal, for joining us for this episode.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me.
All right. So I want to start by just who are you, your academic background, but before that, what's your nationality? Where are you born? Where have you lived? And just give me a kind of a biographical sketch, if you will, and that will help us to get dialed in on why we need to listen to you and your expertise in this field.
Yeah, thank you. So I was born in Qatar in the Arabian Gulf, but I'm not of Qatari descent. My parents are Lebanese Palestinian. I grew up in Qatar. At the age of 14, we immigrated to Canada. I went to high school. I studied university. And then in 2011, I did a master's in theological studies at Tyndale Seminary, now called Tyndale University. I worked in the financial sector for some time before moving to Lebanon and working on a project to develop online theological courses in Arabic at a seminary in Beirut. While there, I did a master's in Middle Eastern studies, and from there moved to the UK to start the journey of a Ph.D. in international relations, which I'm happy to say I've just submitted the corrections about a month ago, and I'm waiting for the final approval. So been around, studied different disciplines. Um, I'd like to think I'm multidisciplined. My friends think I'm confused. So that's where we are.
I'm actually going to use that. I like that. People will say, "Rick, you just seem confused." Thank you. You've given me a good way of responding to that. No, actually, I'm just multidisciplined. That sounds much better. All right,
Perspective,
so
I guess. Yeah.
I interviewed Joyce, your wife, several years ago, and there was a bombing that happened, and was that in Lebanon?
That's the Beirut port explosion. Yeah,
Yeah,
2020, I think must have been.
yeah. Okay. So 4 years ago, and she's been following our resources on social
Mm.
media, and somehow we made that connection. And so it was a delightful conversation to be able to talk again, another tragedy that's happened in that area of the world. Now, when in all of these journeys that you've had geographically, when did you meet Joyce, and when did you all marry, and how many children do you have?
So when I moved to Lebanon, this was 2011, to work on this project of developing e-courses. Joyce was also working on the same project. So we met through a common friend, but at the workplace. We got married in Lebanon in 2012, and we moved to the UK in 2017. And since then, we relocated back to Canada about 2 years ago, or less than 2 years ago. And we have four children. Lara's 10, Carl is 8, Sophia is 5, Ruby is 2.5, and we're expecting a baby next month.
Ah,
A new
congratulations.
baby girl. Yeah, thank you.
You're
So
right in the middle of it.
yeah,
These are,
we got our hands full.
yeah, these are the busy years. Now, or is the plan to stay in Canada, or is there I mean, as you understand things now, or is there a future move somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, our heart is in the Middle East. We're looking for ways to relocate back to the region. Our original plan was to finish the Ph.D. and return to Lebanon, but since the protests that broke out in 2019 and the Beirut explosion, the country has been in sort of deteriorating, and things are falling apart. The whole country's, in many sense, collapsing. So we felt for us as a young family just to go back there in the midst of this with a lot of unknowns and no clear stability or clear prospects, it was going to be very difficult. So our intention is to be back in the Middle East. Could be Lebanon, could be elsewhere in the region, one of the Arabic speaking countries. Our heart is to be part of a gospel-centric church, help build and establish and grow a Bible-centered church in the Arabic world, Arabic-speaking, local, native, indigenous community that can be a witness to the people that are around, and also communicate the gospel clearly in the language of the region.
So ultimately, all this training has led to your aspiration to, are we talking about being a pastor of a local church somewhere in the Middle East, an Arabic speaking local church?
Right now we're open to different opportunities. I also sort of serve with a network of theological schools, Arabic theological schools, called the Middle East and North Africa Association for Theological Education. We offer a range of services like accreditation and e-publishing and online courses and training and the sorts. And so I've been involved with them since 2015. So we're looking for ways to integrate that with our heart for the church, and to see a healthy church established and rooted in the region.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I pastored for 5 years and didn't necessarily enjoy it because it didn't allow me to live within my confusion, my multidiscipline. I have a specific gift set that works out as this ministry is, and as I listen to you, pastoral, or there's this other role over here, academic training, publishing, instructing, teaching. Pastoral could really keep you away from these very specific things because there's so many other things involved in pastoral ministry. I found that I was wearing 47 hats as a pastor, and I really wanted to focus on about 4 or 5 specific ones. And so pastoral ministry was wonderful in that you can interact with people, shepherd people, care for people, etc. But my gifting was really not totally in line with being that broad gifting of a pastor. I'm more of a narrow gift set. It seemed like the way you described your academic journey and your desire, you would be a huge asset, not just to a singular local church, but also to be able to impact a region or the world because of the internet with your different proficiencies. How many languages do you speak?
Just two, English and Arabic.
Arabic. And what language do you use? How do you and Joyce talk to each other?
Primarily Arabic, but our kids
Okay.
are educated in English. So all of our books and textbooks and schooling and TVs and everything they do, it's in English. So it's just being part of the global world, the English being the
Right.
lingua franca. It's everybody speaks English now. So it's, but we try and preserve Arabic as the main language at home. Doesn't always work.
Sure. Yeah, that would be rich if you could. Anyone that can speak English plus, I just think that's a tremendous advantage.
Mhm.
Uh, Hopefully your children will maybe see that someday. And I'm glad you speak Arabic around the home because they will absorb, obviously, a lot of that, and that's a tremendous gift. I'm quite jealous that I can only speak English, and not even proper English at that. All right, so the Middle East. Uh, we can start. Let's start today and move backwards, and let's see where it goes. So I was just looking at the news this morning. The I don't know if it was the National Guard or the police, maybe both. They were starting to. They've already done this in Florida. They've done it in Texas, trying to break up this protest. Why are these Americans? And I do see the irony. Actually, I do want to ask this. Let me ask this question. The LGBT community is pro-Palestine. That seems ironic to me. If I understand things correctly, uh, pro-Palestine, Palestinians, Hamas, they are not pro-LGBT. Is that true?
It would be accurate to say that Hamas is not pro-LGBT, but I think it would fall short of saying that not all pro-Palestinian are Hamas, and Hamas is it's classified by many states as a terrorist organization, and it commits acts of terror. But to many locals in Palestinians and even around the world, they are freedom fighters. Obviously, there are two narratives that are competing here, which one it is. But I think, Rick, if I may, I think it's important to, as we're looking at what's happening right now in Israel, Palestine, rather than look at it from the lens of what's currently happening, I think it's important to situate it in the history of things and
Okay, go
how
ahead.
this has it's not a new problem. It's a recurring conflict. Every few years we get an escalation of violence and things escalate, and the international community gets involved to try and bring in settlement to this. And I think at the heart of this is an issue of injustice and oppression that's causing a lot of people to sympathize and align with the Palestinian cause. And so, again, to put this in context, the state of Israel was established in 1948. Prior to that, there was no official state of Israel. Obviously, there were Jews in the land, in the Holy Land, in the in the land that we know today as Palestine. Jews that are Arab, that are European, that are from Africa, from Ethiopia, and other countries. So it was a mixed, diverse population. What sort of antagonized the situation, what polarized the situation, is this state building project that came about with the help of imperial powers, the UK and others, to establish a national home for the Jews in Palestine, thus creating a preference or a two-tier state where non-Jews would feel like they've been excluded from this national home at a time when they represented the majority of the population. So Jews and Christians represented about less than 20% of the population at the time. This is not to pitch this as a Muslim versus Jewish contrast, but this is to say that there was a diverse community that were living there, coexisting somewhat peacefully. At times there were conflicts like all other places, but this project that sought to create a state where people of Jewish descent or Jewish religion would have supremacy over non-Jews, this created a conflict that we continue to see the consequences of it to this day. And I think what the Palestinians are trying to say, or the pro-Palestinian cause is trying to say, is there has been dispossession of the land. People have been driven out of their homes, literally driven out of their homes. In 1948, more than 700,000 people were expelled from their homes. They settled in refugee camps around Palestine, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Syria, in Iraq. And since then, there has been constant movements to try and reclaim the land, or at least to have some right to return to the land. Many times it ended in conflicts. A lot of times it was sort of one-sided because international powers sided with the Israel state for different geopolitical reasons. So just say, I think it's important to highlight this, because what happened on October 7 is not an instant, it's not a random act, it's a natural consequence, I would say, of years of policies that have consistently discriminated against the Palestinian, dispossessed them, dehumanized them in many ways. The Hamas reaction is a reaction, not to, we can talk about Hamas in a bit, but just to put this and to frame this, it's a struggle for the Palestinian, pro-Palestinian cause is a call for the liberation of the Palestinian, anti-imperialism, anti-colonial call, which is why groups like the LGBT, who are, pro-freedom, pro-liberty, would align with that, not knowing maybe all the nuances that are involved.
So then is October the 7th, you're saying that's justified?
No, but I can see why something like this happened. I can explain the occurrence of something like October 7. And, if things continue the way they are, it's likely that something similar is going to happen again. You continue to violate people and to entrap them. Gaza, especially, in contrast to the West Bank, is like an open air prison. Palestinians there don't control their borders. They don't control the resources that flow in. And what this October 7 has caused is further intensification of this hurt and this violence, because even now it's less inhabitable, with hospitals destroyed, universities destroyed, homes destroyed. The hurt and sort of the vengeance that this nurtures and fosters in many Palestinians we'll probably see it and manifested in different ways in the future.
What are the differences between this being Israel's homeland from a biblical perspective before 1948? do they not have any validity in, like, this is our homeland and we have now created these geographical boundaries and we have the state of Israel?
Yeah, I mean, the question about whether this is the land promised to God, or promised by God to the descendants of Abraham, is a theologically contested topic. We understand that the children of Abraham after Jesus are those that have the faith of Abraham. They are the children of Abraham by faith, those that have the faith of Abraham and believe in Jesus. After Jesus or through Jesus, there's no Greek and Gentile, no Jew or Gentile. We are all one in Christ. So to continue to say that there's a privileged promise or the privileged status for Jews, even after all the privileges that we have in Christ, to many Christians in the region, they find this contrary to how they read the Bible. It's the land is God's is sovereign over the entire land. Even those national boundaries that we associate with states, this is no longer valid in the New Testament understanding of the world. The whole land is possessed by God. God is the owner of the entire earth, and he's going to redeem all of creation, including the Holy Land, including all our countries and states. The state, as we understand it, is a human invention. It's a human construct. We created borders; they're artificial, and we now try to protect them in the name of, God told me to protect this, and God promised me this. So I wouldn't say that the Bible promises the land to the Jews, especially if you're trying to draw a parallel between the current Jewish state, the Israeli state, and God's law, the Old Testament, God's righteous law. There's no way that you can say that how Israel operates in the land, with checkpoints, with confiscation of land, with all border controls and all the limited mobility and all the mistreatment and random throwing people in prison without any case, without all this. This can't be what the Bible describes as the righteous rule of God, or as the justice and peace that we are to seek. So I see this contradictory on two levels. One, purely biblically, to say, personally, and to many Christians in the region, it's hard to draw the connection between, to see the connection between a specific promise to the Jews for the land, and on a more practical level, to see how Israel is operating and functioning in the land. This is not a God-fearing government. Just look at all the demolition, all the destruction, or everything that they've done. This can't be pleasing to God, even if it's portrayed in the sense of self-defense. This has gone beyond self-defense, clearly.
So would there be a parallel between the establishing of the United States when Native Americans were here and we moved them out? Is there a fair parallel there?
I think you can draw that parallel in the sense that all of the modern states in the sort of in the last 2 centuries were established as colonial projects, settlement projects that drove native people from their homeland to establish their own territory, and then they enforced their own ways of living on the local population. The difference, or one of the differences between what happened in the United States and other countries in North America or South America and in the Middle East, is that this is still happening. It's still ongoing. More than 2 years have passed since the establishment of the U.S. And even though today still, I know in Canada, there's a lot of voices crying out for fair and equitable treatment for the native population, which you can understand. I can see where they're coming from. With Israel, Palestine, this is still fresh. This is still happening, even though it's about 70, 75 years. but it's ongoing. And what's making this unbearable is that there's a bit of a duplicity in saying that, politically the talk is about, we want to create a two-state solutions. So we want to have a Palestinian state, we want to have a Jewish state, but practically nothing is happening to that effect. It's just a ploy to stall and drag this indefinitely, all the more that Israel takes even more, builds more settlement, illegal settlements, according to the national law, in Palestinian territory. So I think the more the example that's probably echoes what's happening here, or sort of foreshadows what's happening here, is what happened in South Africa. According to a lot of human rights organizations, including Jewish human rights, prominent Jewish human rights organization, B'Tselem and others, what's happening in Israel is apartheid. This is really off the playbook of what happened in South Africa. Pure discrimination, different classes, black versus white. Here it's Jew versus non-Jew, and as a result, you end up creating policies and descending into violence, because you're trying to enforce a system that the world has rejected, whether it's apartheid South Africa or the whole sort of anti-colonial movement that we saw in the late 20th century. It was a rejection of this top-down, one minority group controlling the other population. So this is why I think there's a global sympathy with the Palestinian cause, because it's legitimate. It's a legitimate struggle for freedom, for self-determination. It does not necessarily align with what Hamas is saying, and does not necessarily correlate with what Hamas intends to say, or often is rhetoric about the destruction of Israel. I think that's there, but I think that gets overplayed. There's a legitimate human rights case for the Palestinian who are suffering as a result of this apartheid regime. So
as I listened to you, so you're pro-Palestinian.
Well, if by that you mean I support the liberation and the freedom of the Palestinian people, then yes.
But add nuance to that, because I know that's too black and white, and I'm sure there's nuance to everything.
Yeah, and so by that I mean I'm not anti-Israeli, in the sense that I am not for the dispossession of the Jews. I'm not for the eradication of Israel. And again, I think that sometimes gets thrown around as anti-Semitism. Pro-Palestinian and criticizing the state of Israel and the government of Israel and Netanyahu and what the Jewish state, military state does, is not anti-Semitism, should not be conflated with anti-Semitism. As a Christian, I respect, and I am to love my neighbor, the Muslim, the Jewish, the secular, the Buddhist, the Hindu, whoever that is. So what that means is I want to live peacefully, coexist with those people that I share the land with. So practically what that means is I do not wish for Israel to be demolished, or for Jews to go back, quote unquote, to their home. And in my mind, I can see, and I think the solution for this is really a one-state solution, not two-state solution, because two-state solution implies that, you're going to have two entities neighboring each other, but they're going to continue fighting each other because they're always going to compete for land, because it's an issue of territory and resources at the end of the day. But if we create a single entity, one state, where Jews and non-Jews can live together, coexist democratically, equal rights, equal access to resources, equal opportunities, that's how you bring peace to the region. And that's, I think, is what aligns with God's and how God wants us to relate to others, to treat them equally, fairly, as we treat ourselves, as we treat our loved ones.
Yeah, it's idealistic, and I don't disagree with the perspective. Uh, we're trying to do that in America, and at this point, um, it has been actually working very well up into the early aughts, and then things did change, specifically when Obama came into office. But
Mm.
there has been a natural progression. We started off, let's say 1776, and things were not perfect, but the trajectory was set, and there had been incremental positive advances that had happened all along the way where rights were becoming more assimilated and more equal. Now, with social media and a number of other things, it has become profoundly divisive. I would also say too that that's on two. It's on a parallel. On the ground, in my experience, I've been in every state in America. I've talked to thousands of people, black, white, doesn't matter. There is a lot of congeniality. People get along. We can have conversations, and there really aren't any issues wherever we have been. People are polite, people are respectful. But then there's a whole nother level here in America, which is social media. It's in cyberspace, and it's on fire. Well, it's a dumpster fire where it's nothing but antagonism and hate. And of course, those hot spots are breaking out. As I led with this interview, that those hot spots are breaking out, and that's part of doing business. And I understand it, but we have I think it's not perfect, but it's one of the best one state solutions, and it has been functioning and evolving into a better space. But for whatever has happened in the last 15 years, things have just gone sideways because those competing entities, somebody, because of human fallenness, somebody always wants to rule over
Mm.
someone else. And so that tension will always exist. If that ideal position ever happened in the Middle East where there was a one state solution, I mean, it will be the same tensions that will be combusting,
Mm.
all over the place, because you're speaking from a Christocentric perspective, and that is the ideal peace on earth. But with human fallenness, that ideal will never transpire. It just doesn't happen that way.
Mm.
But as far as all of the solutions, two state, one state, annihilation of one over the other, it would be, in my view, I would agree with you that we could come together. But again, you're in an interesting place because you're such a hybrid, because of your ethnic background, because of your training, but then also being a Christian. And so I see you mapping a Christian perspective into the solution. But then that Christian perspective of love thy neighbor is not held by Jewish people or Palestinian people, is held by Christian people, regardless of their ethnicity.
Yeah.
So, would you say that is that a majority report with Palestinian people to have a one-state solution?
I mean, some people are more pragmatic than I am. I tend to, I'd like to think that, think about this in terms of, and understand what is the ideal situation and then work towards that, which I think is not necessarily or completely out of reach. I mean, I love the American model and how the US has become a state where really you get people from different backgrounds coming together, functioning equality. I know there are voices that are shouting there's systemic racism in the country and all
Right.
of that stuff. I mean, uh, I know there's conflicting reports on that, but overall, you wouldn't. I mean, this is not what you see in Israel, Palestine. There, if I don't know if you've had a chance to visit the Holy Lands, but you will see the wall, you will see the separation, you'll see the checkpoints, you'll see the military outpost. You'll see, you'll hear through even social media of attacks and dispossessions and destruction, demolition of homes. So this is, and again, even human rights organizations have talked about this, Amnesty International and so on and so forth. But I think one of the problems of thinking about this is that we've convinced ourselves, or we've told ourselves, that this problem is too complex, that it cannot be resolved. And so every time we try and, we want to think about steps that bring us closer to that ideal state of one state solution, you get the narrative pushers of, no, this is too complex, it's much more complicated than that. And granted, I understand that it's complex, but really, if you think about, what is the problem? The problem is there's a native Palestinian population that is trying to have equal rights to their native homeland, and they're denied that by the Israeli government and Israeli military authority. And they are doing this in violation of international law. And the reason why they're allowed to do this, and they were permitted to do this and sort of do what they're doing, is because they have the coverage and the backing of international powers, namely the US. The US is the biggest supporter of Israel, both financially, diplomatically, politically. It's most of the vetoes that the US exercises in the UN Security Council is to defend and to protect Israel from any cases against that might jeopardize the ruling authority. You've seen the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and how there's a sort of a world coming together to try and condemn what's happening in Israel as acts of genocides, as war crimes, as inhumane acts, and then the US, which is the biggest backer, even militarily, of the US, saying we're not going to recognize this. This is going to complicate things. Well, it's going to complicate things because it's going to complicate the US's interest in the region. And here, I think it's important to make that connection between, we have brothers and sisters in the US, and thank God for God-fearing Christians in the US. But the US as a state does not operate as a Christian state.
Right.
It operates with its own agenda. It has its own geopolitical interest. It's trying to maximize its power and influence in the region that is a resource-rich region. So that's how it's functioning. So to try and to frame that as support of one group versus another, or as a weaker group, whether it's the Jewish group or the Christian group, in defense of them, I think that's a weak argument, and really doesn't hold water. Because if you wanna bring stability to the region, if you wanna bring peace, the only way to bring lasting peace is for everybody to have peace. If one group feels like they are being unfairly treated systematically, continually, with no hope of things changing in the near future, mind you, then what do you expect from them? What Hamas says, and the reason groups like Hamas and Hezbollah have gained credibility amongst their own constituents is because they're saying, look what the diplomatic way has resulted in. We've only lost more land. They continue taking more of our land. They continue killing us more. And, politics is not resolving this. So the only solution to this conflict is by bearing arms, by holding arms. And again, sadly, this conflict that's happening right now since October 7th it's really intensifying this, because we're at what, 38,000 people that have died, 700,000, I think, injured. A whole generation of kids are going to grow up with this trauma about how they were bombed, literally, to death, them and their families. So if we're serious about bringing stability to the region, and I'm talking here as Christians that want to promote peace, with the understanding that, our hope in life is Jesus and the coming of the kingdom. That's a godly thing. We're not putting our hope in political enterprises or influential leaders, but in God bringing the kingdom, God changing people from the inside. That's how you can get the kingdom of God manifested, and it's already here, but not fully yet. But if we want to bring things closer to that, if we want to sort of help, draw closer to what is the kingdom of heaven looks like, your will on earth and heaven as it is on earth, it's not going to be by supporting one group versus the other. And it's no matter, it's not a criticism of the Jews as a Jewish nation. It's not anti-Semitism. And evidently, this is what we're seeing even in Israel and Tel Aviv. A lot of Jewish groups are decrying what's happening in Israel and how the government has gone in ways that are not even acceptable by their citizens' own standards, because it's about political interest. So I think it's important to highlight that there's a difference between supporting Jews and criticizing Israel.
Right. So are you advocating a theocracy, or are you advocating a Christian demeanor, a Christian ethic, a Christian attitude?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's up to the people of those territories to decide what works best for them. I mean, theocracy from a Christian point of view, I don't know if we can point to an example and say this is a working model of a theocratic nation, and look where that has gotten us. Historically, emperors and religious authorities sought to invest their power in those emperors, but even that was in vain. And I think, I appreciate what you were saying earlier about, ultimately any human project is going to fail, because this is all, we're all marred by sin. We're all, whatever we do is sinful. So it's not that I'm looking for, a one solution that's going to resolve everything, because nothing is going to do that. Only Christ can do that, and only Christ is going to fulfill that, in his second coming when he returns.
Okay,
but between now and then, we have to think about ways to make that happen.
Right. I see the fulfillment of these ideas in the second coming, not prior to his second coming. That's why I was asking you personally, do you believe in a theocracy? What some people call Christian nationalism, depending on how you define that term, is defined in so many different ways. But okay. So I'm here in America, and I see pro-Palestinians removing the American flag and putting up a Palestinian flag at different universities. As I understand it, Iran, and Hamas would like to totally annihilate Israel. And so I'm not seeing a pathway forward. I mean, if Israel said we want to talk about a one-state solution, in my understanding, which you're welcome to clarify, Iran is not going to make that move. They're not going to, I mean, that's not their desire, if I'm understanding things correctly. So I just, that, and then when I see pro-Palestinians taking down American flags, now we want your country, to be Palestinian. We want your country to be our way. That creates a lot of tension in my own soul.
Yeah, I can see why, this causes the tension. On the Iran thing, I think, this is politics, and this is just, it's part of the rhetoric. I mean, Iran has, the regime in Iran, the mullahs, the sheikhs in Iran have come to power on the sort of rhetoric that they are anti-imperialism, anti-Israel, U.S. The U.S. is the bigger devil, the big devil. I think Israel's the smaller devil. I don't know which one it is. But I mean, this regime came to power in 1979, right? Iran has kept talking about annihilating Israel and all of that stuff. But have you ever seen any attempt, any serious attempt, any war, any conflict, any missiles to try and threaten Israel? The only thing that we've seen for the first time in the history of this conflict was, I think, a month ago or less than a
Yeah.
month ago, where
Yeah, and I don't
drones
know if that
were.
was we say serious attempt. I don't know if that was serious or not. I really I don't know how to
It's just
define
a
that.
publicity. I'll give you, I'll give you the fact, maybe some facts that, show this for what it is as a publicity stunt. It's drones sent. Iran sent those drones over, Jordan and other countries, and has alerted the Israelis and the Americans and all the superpowers and sort of regional powers 3 days in advance that it has launched these drones, and that the damage they're going to do these drones is not going to be substantial. They did not reach, half of them were shot even before they reached Israel. So you look at the evidence and tell me if really is Iran really bent on destroying Israel, or is this just empty rhetoric? I mean, this is part of politics, right? This is how they mobilize their people. This is how they get people to align with their goals. And I think if you want to sort of call their bluff, if you want to call the Iranians bluff, help the Palestinians get equal rights in their home state, whether it's Israel proper or the West Bank and Gaza. That's the only way to sort of strip Iran of its soft power. Iran will continue to say, flaunt this rhetoric that they are for the Palestinian people and against Israel, and you want to send them all to the sea to drown and die. But all the countries do that.
Well, in an abusive marriage, when the husband is yelling at the wife, I wouldn't call it rhetoric. I mean, it could be, and I would not counsel the wife to, hey, you just need to call his bluff. He doesn't mean it. And so when people are threatening, my life, threatening my country, I have to put some weight in that. I don't see that as empty threats or necessarily as just rhetoric. And so that does create a tension. But I also understand, as I was saying earlier, in America, there's all this nonsense that's happening in social media where all of America is on fire. But on a ground level, people are really civil to each other. I'm not sure how to bring that together. I'm flummoxed at that point. So let me ask you. We talked about Iran just briefly, but where does Hamas and Hezbollah play in this? They seem to be agitators. If it's a fair parallel that, let's say, the Palestinians and the Israelis wanted to get along or could come together and talk, it seems to me like Hamas is just throwing a grenade into that and just agitating and making things worse.
Yeah, I think I disagree with that. I don't think Hamas is trying to agitate things as much as they're trying to reach a settlement that is fair and equitable to both sides. There are 10 times the number of prisoners in Israeli prisons, the Palestinian prison, and the Israeli prisoners in the Israeli prisons than Hamas has in hostages. I'm not legitimizing what they're doing. I think it's wrong, and I don't think this is the way to go. I'm just trying to explain why they do what they do. And so the need to bring both parties to the table, the main party that can do this is the US, honestly. And I think they have the leverage over both parties, either by enforcing some ceasefire, by limiting the funding, having some conditional funding to how Israel and other Arab countries that support this resolve the conflict. You're going to need a broker to bring a counselor to bring these two warring factions into a discussion.
I'm sorry. Well, that's not going to happen in our current political state. because our president is not running the country, and he has no capacity to be able to do that. Um, and so, okay, that actually does present a path forward, because the United States is the big brother in all of this. There's no question about that. Um, but there has to be a savvy leader with courage and a lot of insight, plus an eschatological vision. That's a big ask because our political system is so broken, at this point. Uh, that would be a definite prayer request. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I would give that point, but I just I'm not. I really appreciate your perspective. Actually, we did not talk before this interview, obviously, and so you threw me a curveball, which I really like. I like your perspective. It's very helpful because it will help people to dialogue. I don't like rubber stampers. That's too strong. I don't dislike them, but I'm just not comfortable with people that rubber stamp and go with the flow and don't have an independent thought and can't communicate, what they really believe without checking which way the wind is blowing. And so I appreciate your perspective uh, from that perspective, because I think it's helpful. And I think that if we can meet in a month or so in a more private setting in our Leaders Over Coffee meeting, there's going to be some outstanding questions because
Mm.
most of us are operating, and I'll admit it, Americans are operating from a position of ignorance. And we just are. And we don't have the time. We haven't taken the time. We haven't done the studies of Middle East, and we can only respond to and absorb what is given to us. And social media, you cannot trust. And so having a different perspective like yours, this has been very refreshing to me, to be honest with you. But it's not what I was expecting. But I'm not comfortable with pro Palestinian or pro anybody. I'm not comfortable with pro LGBTQ, whatever. I'm not comfortable with Black Lives Matter. I'm not comfortable with, racist. I'm not comfortable with the alt right, white supremacy for the three people that actually believe that. I'm not comfortable with any of those things. And so, but specifically with pro Palestinian taking over universities, that's wrong. That's not the way. Yelling at me and calling me names is not the way to win me to your side. And I have a problem with that. And so, and I don't know how to get people to
Mm.
stand down to where we can have a civil conversation. If somebody's yelling at me and calling me names, I can't listen to them. I mean, just on a very human level, person to person, just between two people. And so when somebody's threatening my country, uh, for whatever the reasons are, it doesn't move the dialogue forward in any redemptive way. And so I feel powerless
Mm.
in this. I don't know what to do other than have these, conversations here. But in the greater narrative of what's happening, it's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, thanks. I think that, Rick, it's good. It's good to remember that we see this in, from different contexts, and your context would be different than somebody in the region or say my
Right.
own
Right.
context. But I think the way I'm understanding what's happening in the U.S. on university and college campuses is a movement that is trying to um, objecting and sort of bringing the putting the spotlight on what's happening in another country, not because it's taking sides, because the majority of the people are not of Palestinian descent or even Arab speakers. You have people from all sort of ethnic backgrounds and nationalities. And so I think what they're trying to do is they're just outraged by what's happening in Israel and Palestine, and how the world remains silenced in the face of, again, what the ICC, International Criminal Court, is coming close to call it genocide. This is happening in front of our eyes. And people are still debating if whether it's, whether it is or it's not, just for political correctness. And I'm sure there's legal trappings to this. But I look at what's happening in the US and I try to explain it by seeing that people are just upset and angry at how the world functions in a way that favors one side over the other. Now, as Christians, I think we should not be drawn to this in a way to think that, the solution would be another political solution. The ultimate solution to this is Christ redemption, Christ giving us a new heart that makes us want to love the enemy, pray for the enemy, pray for God's intervention and the working of God's hand in the hearts of the leaders and the rulers. But that does not necessarily, contradict the call to mobilize, to express anger and dissatisfaction, as long as it's peaceful, right?
Well, that is the problem. It's not peaceful.
Yeah, and I think, but I don't think it would be fair to paint the whole movement. And this is a global movement. This is not just happening in the US. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in the UK. It's happening throughout Asia, Hong Kong, Korea, Japan. Why is this gaining so much traction? There must be something deeper than just an attack on American sovereignty or the American flag. Why is it that a lot of people are sympathizing with this? I think there's a humanistic side to things that people just, resonating with this.
Right, but that's also a nuanced answer. It's not monolithic. There is the cause that you're espousing, and I have no issue with that. I understand that. Then there's the subversion effect where people do want to take down America. That's subjective. There's no question about that. And then I was watching a video yesterday where a gentleman was interviewing protesters on the street and asking them, why are you doing this? What is it about? One guy said, I have no idea. They had a stack of signs over there, and I just picked one up and started walking around, and then began to ask specific questions like, what is apartheid, et cetera. And they have no clue. They have no definition, no category, no understanding what these words are. And so the answer, why is there a movement? That's a nuanced answer, but it's definitely not a singular strand. And so I can have compassion for what you're saying about the Palestinian issue and their struggle. But this thing is so complex because people are not, let's just say people are not having good faith protest. There's underlying agendas here that really convolute. And so there's a tension here between what you and I believe the same thing, ideal, what the ideal should be, but there's just these strands of complexity that just create distraction. In counseling, we call it a complicating problem. A complicating problem is problems in addition to the actual problem. And so you have to pull out the complicating problem so that you can actually talk about the real thing that we need to talk about. Unfortunately, there are bad actors on both sides that are not helping in the conversation. I don't know how to pull those pieces apart and have them to go time out so that you can actually talk in a monolithic way of what is going on, and that is the complexity. The only thing that I know to do is what I'm doing now, is to share the message of Christ, help one family at a time, help one individual at a time. That's all that I know to do. And if I could do more, if we could reach more, that would be fantastic. But that is my answer. And that would be my answer to You're doing this in your own way with your gifting, your training, your education, your background. You're doing that as well. And if more people could come together and we don't have any complicating problems between you and me. We can have a good faith conversation about the actual issue without throwing rocks at each other and just convoluting things. If more people would do that, I think we could get to ultimately an imperfect fallen solution, but it would be a solution that would, because what we have now is not a solution at all.
Mhm. Absolutely. And thank you for creating the space for these conversations to happen and for other people to drop in and listen and just, I guess part of what, we're both doing is trying to raise awareness
Right.
about what's happening.
Right.
It's to educate people. There's a lot of fact checking that needs to happen. Unfortunately, with the internet and the fake news and how things get exaggerated and sometimes pushed in certain ways, it's hard to really see, what's right, what's the truth in all of this, which I guess, what I try to think about is, to try and put things into perspective, as it, pertains to what we're seeing in Israel and Palestine is, surely there are disruptors, there are people who are bent on violence and just, a nihilist and just mutinous and all of that. But if you look sort of, globally on what's happening around the world, even, I guess, maybe in a lot of US campuses, I don't know exactly what proportion of those protests end up in violent or end up being sort of shut down because they don't want that confrontation. What's the trend? What's the overall nature or character of these protests? Are they generally peaceful or are they generally violent? Do they create more hatred, or do they try and shed light on a specific aspect of things? And here, I guess it's important to consider the sources. What are you looking at and all of that stuff. But certainly, what you're saying is crucial. As Christians, I don't believe we are to resort to violence, or war is the solution to any of these conflicts. Dialogue, conversations, raising awareness, educating people, having these, awareness campaigns and whatnot. That's how you not win, but that's how you come to resolving these conflicts. The problem is, though, the challenge is you got to do this against the clock, because the other group are getting impatient and just getting tired from waiting for a solution to come about from these talks, because to them, they don't have Christ, they don't have faith in Christ. Their hope is not in the coming of the kingdom, but in a different political project. And, we have to be aware of that and just try and balance their expectation and the havoc that they can cause and create, with what we can do as Christians in the world with our own influence.
Yeah, what we need in America is we need better parents. And what I mean by parents in a metaphor is that if our children are fighting, a parent would step in and stop them from fighting, throwing things at each other, hurting each other, and they would set them down, and then we would have a civil conversation. Unfortunately, in America, our government is a permissive parent, and so they're not for the people. If they came in and said, no, we're not going to have unpeaceful protest, we're not going to be hurting people, we're not going to be stopping traffic, we're not going to be doing these types of things, we're not going to ignore the problem, but first we've got to stop doing these things, and then we will sit down and we will talk. And so in America, we need a better parent. Unfortunately, we have a permissive parent that allows all of this for a multiple number of reasons that they do it, which we are not going to get into at this
Mhm.
point. We're at the end. But if we bring that down to our level, we can't be part of the problem. We can't be. So I can't go on the internet and say something unkind. I can't go on the internet and just be harsh towards someone that I disagree with. And so on the most microscopic level, I have to model the very thing that I would like to see magnified in our culture. It's ideal. It won't happen perfectly in a fallen world, but I can't complain about the problem if I am participating in the problem. And so
Mm.
I need to be an example. This is Elias Ghazal. That is 1 hour, and it has flown by. Probably have created more questions than have been answered through this interview. And for that, I'm very grateful. For those of you who are part of Leaders Over Coffee, we're going to have a monthly meeting here sometime soon. As you watch this, I want you to have your questions. And then as we come together for that meeting, you can ask Elias all the things that I didn't ask, say all the things that I didn't say, and that'll be a fantastic time. Elias, is there a resource that you have, a book, a website, or something, or a way that people can connect with you? Do you have a social media account, or do you just lay low and kind of anonymous?
Uh, I'm on Twitter. I'm not very active on Twitter, but this is how I can be found. Can't remember what my handle is. Uh, just there, I think it's Elias Ghazal at Elias Ghazal one. That people can get in touch, and
Okay, yeah, and
from
I'll
there,
put that in, I'll put that in the show notes too, by the way, so they'll have it.
yeah. And then if somebody's interested in some resources, one of the things that continues to surprise me is how people's reaction, and particularly in the West, when they find out that there are Christians in the Middle East, that there are Arab Christians, they just assume that all the people of the Middle East, all the Arabs are Muslims. There's about 10% of the region is Christian. That's what we know, not to mention sort of the underground church. So, and there are people who have been rooted in the region that have been thinking and dealing about these specific issues. If somebody's interested about the Israel-Palestine, and scholars that have written about this. So if somebody's interested, we can, I can recommend some resources from local authors that have thought biblically about this and have, can counter maybe some of the mainstream narratives that might be dominant in the West.
If you would send me a list of some of those resources, and I will put it in the show notes so that people can click on it and get to those resources. It is important that if a person hasn't traveled, you can really look at life through a tube, and you have no expanded vision of how life really is, because you can get so hunkered down into your small community. As I've traveled more and more and been in other countries, it's like, wow, you don't think like me. You don't think like American. You don't see things the way that I do. And I know that everybody, it's a privilege that I've had to be able to travel extensively, and it's been a huge benefit. And many people don't have that, but it's important to know because we can become so narrow-minded. And I mean that in a proper sense of that word, not in a pejorative, but we can become so narrow-minded in our view because we just have not had that experience, which is not unlike a young pastor who's 20 years old versus one who's 50. But as that lens begins to expand across cultures, across countries, you begin to see things differently because everybody does not have an American centric view. And so I appreciate the opportunity not just to travel, but also to talk to individuals who see things a little bit differently, but yet we're in the body of Christ. And that's the beauty. There can be absolute unity and multiple. Jordan Peterson said one time that there's more that we don't know than what we do know. And so we should be eager to step out into that omniscience and to continue to learn rather than just holding on to all that we do know and not growing and not maturing. And so I enjoy talking to people, interviewing people. It helps me to really process life personally, also culturally. So, Elias, thank you so much. If you get me a list of recommended resources for those who want to pursue that, that would be fantastic, and it'll help us. And then we'll see you again, hopefully in a month or so. Thank you for being on the episode.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you for the time and for creating the space.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us. Learn more and get access to other resources at lifeovercoffee.com.